Actually, that's a very fitting kavanah for what I want to look at with you today. I'll explain as we get into it, but let's begin as we do each week. Welcome in, everyone. Take a minute to take a deep breath, and let's summon our awareness for this special time of connection with our texts and with each other. Join me in a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. This week, Parashat Korach, and I have something very specific that I want to look at with you, which is actually not directly about the rebellion. It's not directly related to the reason that Parashat Korach is most famous for the rebellion of Korach, but it does relate back to that episode. And so once again, I've been trying to focus these study times this year on the latter part of the parasha, since we're following that triennial rhythm. And I'd like to look with you at what happens after the rebellion, when there is indeed still a crisis of leadership and a need to determine who actually won the election, and to shut down, all false claims of fraud, etc., etc. You can see I'm trying to connect the current moment with the ancient moment, perhaps very clumsily. Before I pull up the source sheet that I have for us today, I just want to talk with you for a moment about, I guess, the power of myth, sacred myth, and the power of symbolism. Because what we're going to look at today is the reason that it's meaningful and powerful is because of what it symbolizes. When we look at it at the pshat, as you'll see in a minute, the pshat meaning the sort of the entry level, the concrete level, it's okay, whatever, okay, fine. But when we understand that the symbols here are meant to refer to a number of other things. And the symbol that's going to come up strongly for us today is that of the almond tree, as we call in Hebrew the shkedia. The Hebrew for almond is shaked, and the tree, shkedia. That's going to be presented as a central symbol today in this question of who is really in charge. The shkedia is important in ancient Israel. We always think of the roots in nature. Sorry, I don't mean to make a pun out of roots, but the roots of how these symbols are connected to the natural world. Ancient Israel was an agrarian society, very much connected to the rhythms of nature for its own survival. And so why is the almond tree of particular interest in ancient Israel? Well, one of the reasons is that it's the first tree that blossoms in the cycle of spring. So in a society where you were watching carefully to see the renewal of the growth season, the appearance of those almond blossoms is meaningful on a theological level. It means that God is present. It means that nature has once again renewed itself, which means that personal survival will be possible. So I think even maybe for modern Israelis, the almond tree has that kind of resonance. We don't have that relationship to it in this part of the world because we don't have the same cycles of nature over here. But as part of the Jewish people, we are deeply connected to that, the appearance of those almond blossoms and what they portend for the natural cycle of spring. And then we also are connected to the symbolism of our ancestors, the symbolism of the almond tree for our ancestors. So not just that it was the awakening of spring, but that it would also be used, as we'll see today, in a few different ways to refer to our relationship with God. So I couldn't help, I was thinking about all of this morning, and I was thinking about the Tu B'Shvat song, which sounds so light and joyful. Hashkedia porachat v'shemesh gam zorachat. The almond tree is blossoming and the sun is also shining. Tu B'Shvat higia chag ha'ilanot. The holiday of Tu B'Shvat is here. It's a lovely, like it's almost like a nursery song, like joyful, how lovely. And so you walk away thinking, oh, okay, very nice. The almond tree, how pretty, very nice. But when we look at how the almond tree comes up in this week's parasha and how it comes up in other texts that we're going to look at today, you begin to grasp that it has multiple facets as a symbol. It symbolizes not only the promise of spring, the promise of God's love, perhaps, but also other aspects of our relationship with God, which aren't always lovely and sweet and easy, which are sometimes expressions of judgment, sometimes expressions of mortality. So all of that somehow is encapsulated in this one little almond blossom that's going to be in front of us today. Okay, so again, I'm asking us to sort of turn on our metaphorical eyes, the eyes through which we can see metaphor and understand symbolism, and not just read it for the face. Okay, enough of an introduction. Now, hang on just a sec. So the title for this week is a reference to the 23rd Psalm. Shivtecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni. Your rod and your staff. But I added the question mark here as if to say, I'm editorializing with the psalmist. The psalmist doesn't have a question mark. The psalmist is making a statement that God's rod and staff are a comfort. But as we're going to see in this week's parasha, well, it has different ways of looking at it. Okay, so sorry, before I go all the way into this, I just should explain the opening of the parasha, as I think you know, but just in case, to get us on the same page, is the story of this dramatic rebellion. Korach and his followers come at Moses and Aaron and say basically, who put you in charge? We have just as much right to lead. And Moses, as he typically does, responds with humility and maybe with some bewilderment and says, I don't know what to do. So I'm going to fall on my face. At least that's how I often read it. The rebellion ends with Korach and his followers being sucked into the ground. The ground opens up in a great Hollywood moment, and Korach and his followers are made to descend into Sheol, as the text says, while the rest of the Hebrews, the rest of the soon-to-be Israelites, are watching this and are horrified. Following that, the children of Israel come at Moses and Aaron themselves and say, this is a mess, this is terrible. They're equally upset. So there's even more strife on top of the strife of the rebellion. So that's the introduction to what we're now going to look at. Okay, so that's what's already happened. Now we're looking at Numbers chapter 17. And here we have, once again, God trying to figure out, what am I supposed to do with these people to get them to understand how this relationship works? Okay, so let's see what's happening here. God says, Daber al b'nei Yisrael, v'kach me'itam mateh levet av. Each one of them, each one connected to their ancestral house, a staff, mateh. And then going on, verse, I wanted to get this. Et shemo tichtov al matehu. So each staff is supposed to be inscribed with the name of that clan. Okay, and then going on, verse 18, Ve'et shem Aharon tichtov al mate Levi. On the staff of Aaron, make sure to write the name Levi. Ki mate echad lerosh beit avotam. That's the name for that house. Okay, and then the instruction is, I'm skipping over to the English now, bring all of these staffs together, deposit them at the tent of meeting, and I will meet with you, God says. I'll be there. Then verse 20, skipping back to the Hebrew, V'haya ha'ish asher evchar bo, the one that I choose, matehu yifrach, that staff is going to blossom, to sprout. V'hashikoti me'alai al tilunot b'nei Yisrael. And in this moment of choosing and sprouting, I will quiet finally, as the English says, the incessant murmurings, the constant complaining of the children of Israel. Him malinim alechem, the ones that are complaining against you, Moses and Aaron. And of course, by complaining against Moses, they're complaining against God. Okay, everybody so far catch what's going on here? It's really rather remarkable. So God in God's great, all-powerful mind says this is how we're going to figure this out. Gather all these staffs, make sure they're labeled with the correct name, and then one of them is going to sprout, to blossom. And once we see who that staff of blossom is, this nonstop complaining and doubting, which has become, lethal. It's lethal doubting, because every time there's more incessant complaining and doubting, another, chunk of the community is wiped out, as they were here. There was a plague here. I left out that part. Okay, so Moses goes ahead and organizes this whole operation. Moses brings the staffs before God. We're now verse 22. And let's catch this. Vayanach Moshe et hamatot lifnei Adonai. He gathers all the staffs, ba'ohel ha'edut. And now verse 23. Vayehi mimochorat vayavo Moshe el ohel ha'edut v'hinei parach matei Aharon. And now let's see whose staff is going to blossom. It's the staff of Aaron. Just to see this in the English, the next day Moses entered the tent of the pact, and there the staff of Aaron of the house of Levi had sprouted. It had brought forth sprouts, produced blossoms, and borne almonds. And that's how we get to the Shkedia. V'hinei parach matei, I'm just repeating this, parach matei Aharon levet Levi, vayotze parach, vayatzetz tzitz, vayigmol shkedim. And this sentence is going to be important for us in looking at some commentaries and also just talking together. So I just want to pause with you here. I was trying to think, are there other places in the first 3 books of the Torah where there is such supernatural activity? So for sure, you could say in the 10 plagues, in the Exodus from Egypt, there's a fair amount of supernatural activity that goes on, right? I mean, the 10 plagues themselves are a kind of supernatural activity, and the splitting of the sea, I guess you could say, is supernatural.
In Genesis, when the snake talks, or and all that going on in Genesis, would you say
Okay, so
Garden of Eden is a lot of supernatural stuff?
In the story of Genesis, in the opening, it does seem out of the ordinary to have a snake speaking with Chava, for sure.
And when you talk about the plagues and the going out of Egypt, it's important also to mention that the mateh is critically important.
Correct.
Moses uses his staff to bring the blood into the Nile and to the various plagues. And I think even at the burning bush, he throws down something. Does his staff turn into a snake at the burning bush? I don't remember, but
Yeah.
his mateh at the burning bush is
Yes, it
important
does.
also.
Is significant too. Okay, great, great, great,
Um,
great.
Also, at the
Go
Red
ahead.
Sea, at the Red Sea, yeah, that's also a
That's-
supernatural event.
You mean when God says, raise your staff?
Yes,
Raise your staff. And the staff, you're right. You're right, Gil. The staff is the thing that splits the sea. I forgot about that. So, wow. You know, somebody else was going to say something. Go ahead. I
Yeah,
can't see all of you right now.
as Carol here. How about when
Yeah.
Lot's wife turns to salt?
Oh, yes. I certainly, we could certainly say that's a supernatural moment, right? She's
Yeah.
told not to look back and she can't help herself and she does and turns into a pillar of salt.
And Moses also throws the staff down to become a snake in front of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's magicians, do the same thing.
That's right. That's right. Sort of before the plagues all start as like an appetizer for the plagues.
And the talking donkey with Balaam.
Right. That's coming up. But
Right.
right. We
Oh,
haven't
not yet.
gotten there yet. But right. And so far in this part of the Torah, those are some of the examples of supernatural activity we've seen. Boy, all this talk about the rod or the staff, if you want, makes me think of, I don't know, I'm not enough of a magic person to know, but you know how magicians will often have what do you call this? Like
A wand.
like a wand. Yes. And what do they say? Abracadabra, which is adaber. Excuse me. It's I will create as I have spoken. It's based on Hebrew roots.
Avra, yeah, Avra, yeah,
Avra kedavra.
right.
Wait, abracadabra comes from Hebrew?
It can be traced back to these Hebrew roots. Avra is like from livro,
Lord
to
bara.
create.
Wow,
Correct.
this
Correct.
Wednesday teaching is really amazing. This is worth it for the whole year.
All right. Yeah, abracadabra. Right. I mean, that's not the point of our class today, but it's just the interesting thing. I never thought about this before. Like the idea of somebody with a staff in their hand can bring forth magical outcomes. Anyway, I was so fascinated by this. You know, of all of God's many options to move things in the right direction, God seems once again to rely on a staff in the hand, in this case of Aaron, and needs a visual to shock the people into awareness. So imagine your staff, your regular walking stick, suddenly blossoming with, in this case, almond blossoms. It doesn't really tell us here what the children of Israel, how they reacted, but they must have reacted. I mean, I would react, wouldn't you? If somebody said, "Oh, here, look, I just have this cane over here," and now suddenly it's alive with a living plant. The reason I asked about just to talk about the presence of the supernatural is I was wondering if it seems to me, as Bob Barkin was starting to suggest also, that the wilderness is a place where supernatural vision, mystical vision can happen in a way that maybe it can't in other times or other places. The wilderness is a place where amazing things can happen. And here is something amazing that's happening as a way to establish governance. Okay, let's keep reading just a little bit more here.
Rachel, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go
And
ahead.
Maybe we haven't gotten there yet,
Mhm.
but I'm puzzled about how this exercise would make people stop complaining.
Well, let's just hang on.
Okay.
I think that the answer to your question might come. Okay, so just hold on to this verse 23, which is kind of the ta-da, abracadabra. Here comes the blossoming of the shkedim. Now verse 24, Moses brought out all the staffs and each identified and recovered his staff. 25, God says to Moses, put Aaron's staff before the pact, so that the mutterings against me may cease, lest they die. Let's see that in the Hebrew. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Hashev et Matea Haron, return the staff of Aaron, lifnei ha'edut, to put it before the tent of witnessing, I'll say. Lemishmeret, as a kind of a guard, as a symbol, leot, lifnei meri, the ones who are complaining. Utchal tulunotam me'alai velo yamutu. So they, like, because if they keep complaining, I'm going to kill them. That's what God is saying. So let's shut down this complaining now so that they don't have to die. Going on now, verse 27. The children of Israel are again wound up and upset by all this. Vayas Moshe kasher tziva Adonai oto ken asa. Vayomru v'nei Yisrael Moshe lemor. Hein gav'anu. Avadnu kulanu avadnu. Like, oh no, we're lost. It's all lost. It's all a mess. But it's not, at least for the moment. Verse 28. Did I lose us? No, right there. Okay, sorry. This is the answer to Harriet's question now. Look at verse 1 of chapter 18 now. Vayom Adonai el Aharon, God says to Aaron, Ata uvanecha uvet avicha itach, you, your children, your ancestral house, tisu et avon hamikdash, va'ata uvanecha itach, tisu et avon kehunatchem. Let's be clear now. You and your sons and the ancestral house under your charge hold whatever goes wrong in the sanctuary, it's on you. You and your children alone shall bear any guilt connected with your priesthood. Okay, going on verse 2. V'gam et achicha mate Levi shevet avicha hakrev itach v'yilavu alecha v'yishretucha v'ata uvanecha itach lifnei ohel ha'edut. Verse 2. You have to also associate yourself and your whole clan with the tribe of Levi. Let's organize all of this. Going on, verse 3. They're going to discharge their duties to you. And so you can see, I'm sorry, I don't want to belabor this, but what's going on here is God is saying, let's get organized here. You are now in charge. You are the authentic priesthood, and there will be no more arguing about this. So, Harriet, I hope that begins to answer your questions. Look at how this ends, going all the way down here to verse 7. V'ata uvanecha itcha tishmeru et kehunatchem. You are the ones who guard the true, authentic priesthood. L'chol davar hamizbeach, everything that is going to come to the altar. Ulemibet la parochet, va'avadtem avodat matana. God says, eten et kehunatchem, v'hazar hakarev yumat. This is your job. You're in charge of the priestly practices. And what is it? How does it end? Any outsider who encroaches shall be put to death. Hear that, anyone who thought they were with Korach, or anyone who thought they were going to challenge this leadership. Okay, so Harriet, does that answer the question you were starting to ask before? Go ahead, Gil.
Well, that kind of takes the responsibility away from God and stuff and gives it to Aaron and his family to take care of these things. It's kind of not just, it's in relation to God. And it made me think of the sacrifices and the whole Yom Kippur thing on Yom Kippur, where they make the sacrifices to atone for everything they do wrong during the year. There's one he does for himself, one he does for the house of the priests, and one he does for
all of Israel.
Because he's responsible, the priest is responsible.
That's right.
Not God. So yeah, that's really interesting to see where it comes from.
God needs, it's interesting, God needs an intermediary in the human realm that's other than Moses. Moses is God's spokesperson, but there, as Gil is saying, there's another role that's needed here, and it gets established here. Shlomo, looks like you're going to say something.
Yeah, I think it's just important to add, and maybe you've done this and I didn't hear it, that Korach was also a Levi.
Mm-hmm.
And so what he's doing, he's saying the Levim are supposed to, so why don't I have more power or more authority? And part of that was against Moses and Aaron specifically, and the other thing is that some of his followers were from the tribe of Reuven, which was the firstborn son.
Mm.
And so the firstborn sons join in the rebellion because they want to, I assume, regain their place as the primary son and the eldest. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
that's all I wanted to add.
I was just trying to think, what's that word? What's the word where primogeniture?
Yeah.
The firstborn gets the first pick. Audrey, go ahead.
I just have a quick question. Is there anything to be taken from the fact that we are told that God says, write Levi on the staff? It doesn't go into any list of the other names that should be written, but that one is to be written. And then, it ultimately ends up where that's the one that's sprouting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Is there...
It's a good observation, right? It doesn't say on this staff, write this name. On this staff, it just says on this one, make sure you write Levi.
I think it says right Aaron on the tribe of Levi staff.
Right, no, it says to Aaron or something.
Hang on, we can look. Let's see.
Yeah.
Inscribe Aaron's name on the staff of Levi.
And Aaron's name, yeah, that's even more specific.
Yes, yes, yes.
Like don't ascribe Korach's name on it. Put
Ve'et Shem
Aaron's name.
Aharon tichtov al matei Levi.
Yeah.
Right, write the name Aaron here, so it's clear.
Not anyone else's name. Yeah.
Correct.
So he really is. God is trying to assemble some kind of order, as you said.
Mm-hmm. Right. So my screen is showing that two people have their hands raised, but I can't see who you are. So, Luther, go ahead.
It does say inscribe each, at least in English, I can't always read the Hebrew, inscribe each one's name on his staff.
Mm-hmm.
So all 12 have their names on the staff.
Yes,
but
yes.
Without Aaron. And whether that's just because that's what good writers do, or if there's greater significance, don't know.
Right. It does. Right. I thought Audrey was saying it's interesting that Aaron's name is specifically mentioned, but not anyone else's name.
Correct.
Okay, good. Was there one other person who had a hand up a second ago, or did I miss them? Okay. A little bit of a different tech setup this morning, today. All right. So my curiosity went to the almond as I started to open the session today. The symbolism of the almond, what does it mean that it was an almond blossom when it could have been that staff of Aaron could have turned into anything because God was in charge. It could have become, whatever God wanted, but it turns out to be an almond blossom. So I just pulled together some other places where the significance of the almond as a symbol becomes important. And here's one of the more famous ones from the beginning of the book of Jeremiah. This may be familiar to you, but I wanted to show it again here. Jeremiah chapter 1. Vayhi devar Adonai Elai lemor. The word of God came to me. This is Jeremiah speaking. Ma ata roeh Yirmiyahu. What do you see, Jeremiah? Va'omar makel shaked ani roeh. I see a branch of an almond tree. So this is the opening of Jeremiah's prophecy. His call to prophecy happens around the vision of an almond tree. And then the next verse, verse 12, Vayomer Adonai Elai, Hetevta lirot. I love this word. Hetevta lirot, ki shoked ani. Okay, so you have to see a few things going on here. Will it let me? Hetevta, you can see in the middle of Hetevta the word tov or tav, which is tov. So you as if you have seen well. Hetevta lirot. You've looked well here. You've done a good job. Ki shoked, and you can see that shaked and shoked without the vowels are the same word, shin kuf daled. One here, shaked, pronounced this way, meaning an almond tree, shoked here, and one of the other commentators that I looked at said, oh, look, God's making a pun here. Isn't that cute? Shoked is I'm watchful. I'm paying attention, God is saying. Ki shoked ani al divari la'asoto. I'm watching to see if my word is going to be observed in action here, which is where the shift comes from sort of the idea of, oh, the almond tree, how lovely, how life affirming, how sweet and beautiful, to, well, it also comes with this connotation of vigilance. And vigilance is a posture that we take when we're watching for something that we're not sure about, or we're watching to make sure that something happens. It's not a posture of ease and celebration. It's a posture of concern. Does that make sense so far? Okay, so the shoked and shoked are kind of rolling around in our mouths here in this interesting way. Okay, now this is just from the Mishnah, and I just grabbed the part about almonds. It's a multiple verses about different fruits and their whether those fruits are fit for tithing. Okay, so look with me at the end of this Mishnah, this little piece here. Hachayav bashkedim hamarim patur b'metukim. Hachayav b'metukim patur b'marim. The condition in which bitter almonds are liable to tithes, or are sort of can be used for tithes, is exempt in the case of sweet almonds, and the condition in which sweet almonds are liable to tithe is exempt in the case of bitter almonds. The reason this is relevant here, we can sort of lose our minds in the peel pull of it, like in the just playing with words. But the idea that the almond fruit, first they're the blossom, then the actual fruit, the almond, the nut that we like to eat, can sometimes be sweet, can sometimes be bitter. Just in the same way as, at least in my imagination, the initial image of the almond tree is one of beauty and sweetness, but that it also has this challenging connotation, as we just saw in Jeremiah. Shaked and shoked. Okay. Ecclesiastes. When one is afraid of heights and there is terror on the road, for the almond tree may blossom, the grasshopper be burdened, and the caper bush may bud again, but man sets out for his eternal abode with mourners all around in the street. So again, the almond blossom, and interestingly here, the grasshopper, since we just heard about grasshoppers last week in Shalach Lecha, when the scouts come back. Everybody know what I'm talking about? When the scouts come back from looking at the promised land, and they say, we are going to be like grasshoppers to these giants. They're going to trample us. It's all going to be over. So there's an ominous feeling to these symbols, and in this case, the almond tree. Okay. Here's a bit of Rashi on the part of the Torah we just looked at. So Rashi to Numbers 23. So let's, Numbers 17:23. Let's just go back and remind ourselves of what that is. That's our central verse. Where are we? 23. Can you see it here? Yeah. Come on. Will it let me? This one. Okay, we're looking at the Rashi commentary on this. Vayhi mimochorat vayavo Moshe ohel ha'edut vehine parach matea Haron levet Levi vayotze perach vayatzet tzitz vayigmol shkedim. These last two words, vayigmol shkedim, is what Rashi is now going to comment on. Okay, let me go down here. Rashi. Velama shkedim, I'm skipping down to the middle of his commentary. Why particularly almonds? Hu hapri hamimaher lehafriach mikol haperot. It's the first fruit that blossoms. It comes earlier than all other fruits. Af hameorer al hakehuna. So they don't give you this in the translation. Af hameorer hakehuna. The one that highlights, awakens to the truth of the kehuna, the priestly identity. Sorry, people can hear the background noise here. I apologize for that. So the shkedia is mentioned here, is invoked here, because it not only is it the first fruit, it is also the punishment of one who sets themselves in opposition to the constituted priesthood, as we saw in our parasha. If Aaron's staff is blossoming with almond blossoms, you don't want to cross that. You don't want to be challenging that. And then Rashi says, here's an example from 2 Chronicles, just to make his point. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So let me stop the share for a minute. I searched for some different examples of where this image of the almond tree shows up in other places. Especially interested to see if some of our Hebrew poets, what they had to say about it. And I didn't find exactly what I was looking for. But I did find something by the poet Paul Celan. And Luther, I'm specifically looking at you to see if you know his work at all.
Absolutely. He was, to make it short, he was a survivor of the Shoah. He had been a yeshiva student prior to the Shoah, became very, very secular afterwards, but he also made the choice to write in the language of his oppressors and the murderers of his family. He wrote in German. And as he did so, he actually took that language apart and put it back together in new ways, almost literally. The structure of his poems is very experimental because of what he was trying to do with language.
Okay, thank you. So let me go back and screen share. Okay. Here's his poem. Actually, Luther, would you read this?
I will try. Count the almonds. Count what was bitter and kept you awake. Count me in. I looked for your eye when you opened it. No one was looking at you. I spun that secret thread on which the dew you were thinking slid down to the jugs, guarded by words that to no one's heart found their way. Only there did you wholly enter the name that is yours. Sure-footed, stepped into yourself. Freely the hammers swung in the bell frame of your silence. The listened for reached you. What is dead put its arm round you also, and the three of you walked through the evening. Make me bitter. Count me among the almonds.
Thank you. Okay, and then to add to what Luther was already explaining us about Paul Celan, I just included this little bit of commentary by James Graham. So just to see what he has to say here. To understand Celan's opening line, what's the opening line again? Count the almonds. We have to understand the associations that almonds had for him, beginning with what was personal. which is that he remembered his mother baking bread and cakes and was fond of almonds and often used them. And as the commentator says here, this ordinary particular memory, sometimes it's the most everyday memories that are the hardest ones. But then he says, remember that Celan also knew Hebrew, as Luther was just explaining to us. He had been a yeshiva student and therefore knew that the Hebrew word for almond is very like the word for a watch or a vigil. Thus, the second line contains a hidden pun, which works only in Hebrew, but not in Celan's German or in English. And I wasn't able to find the original. I think Celan originally wrote this poem in German, as Luther was just explaining. The same pun is made by God's self, with somewhat uncharacteristic wit. And he refers back to the book of Jeremiah, which we looked at before. The Lord asks Jeremiah what he sees, and he replies, a shoot of an almond tree, shaked. God tells him, you have seen well, for I will keep watch, shoked, over my word to make sure that it gets performed. So almonds are a metaphor for eyes, keeping watch, being awake, being alive, and not just a metaphor invented by the poet here, but one that resonates in Jewish history and poetry. And then he goes on, this non-Jewish commentator, to add that almond blossoms decorate the menorah of the Israelites in the wilderness. The almond blossom is an emblem of reassurance of Jewish identity. So I don't know, somehow by accident, I got really interested this year in the menorah. I've written about it several times. I hope I haven't bored people with all of my fascination with the menorah, but it came up, I guess, last week when we read Parashat Beha'alotcha, and of course it comes up multiple times in the book of Exodus as a symbol of a lot, not just, again, not just the pshat, the concrete level of you're supposed to light this lamp in the sanctuary, but as a symbol of the renewal of nature, as a symbol of the Garden of Eden. And now we're being reminded with the specific mention of the almond blossom part of the menorah, it's also now a reminder of the watchfulness of God. So it's light, it's Eden, it's also, God is watching us, God is watching us from a distance, etc., etc. I don't know about you, but I find it so fascinating, and that all of this is packed into this one little fascinating verse in the middle of Parashat Korach. I have more to say, but Bob, you go ahead.
It just reminds me that remember the play Arsenic and Old Lace. It's arsenic is the smell of almonds. And
really?
yeah. And apparently I just actually looked it up. I was wondering why, because bitter almonds have cyanide in it. And so I just think that's an interesting association that, almonds, sweet almonds are one of the delights, and bitter almonds are actually poisonous.
Are actually poisonous, right? Wow, that's very interesting, especially if we went back to the Mishnah that we looked at a few minutes ago about the sweet almonds and bitter almonds, some of which are appropriate for tithing and some of which are not, and which can, another way, kind of neutralize each other. Sorry, Bob Singer. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Right. Sometimes an almond, sometimes a piece of marzipan is just a piece of marzipan, and sometimes there's a whole theological message being baked into it. Good. Okay. Let me keep going. I guess I was afraid that today you were all going to look at me and roll your eyes and say, really? Do we have to talk about almonds for half an hour? But I think it's pretty fascinating what the Torah can do with one little symbol. And as we start to understand what that symbol is symbolizing, takes on a whole new meaning. And Luther, correct. You're saying almonds are shaped like the eyes. one of the commentaries in here, and I can't remember whether I brought it into the source sheet, it talks about that's part of where we get this notion that the almond is the symbol for watchfulness. And Audrey is saying you're snacking on almonds right now. Is that what you just said? Yeah.
Just by chance, I brought a bowl of almonds to class. I had no idea.
Hopefully,
High
hopefully not
protein.
bitter almonds.
Yeah, the sweet
Yeah.
almonds. Don't
Sweet
worry,
almonds.
I'm fine. I'm feeling fine.
That's good. Very good. Okay. Okay, I want to go back one more time to this. Hold on. Actually, I'm going to save this Schneer's almond piece for the end, but I have something different I'd like to show you. So hang on, please. Will this let me? Yes. Okay. This is actually now a different Sefaria sheet. It's not mine. It's composed by someone else whose name I will tell you in a minute, but I want to first look at this with you. This person who compiled this sheet, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment, pulls together a passage from Tractate Psachim, going back to the Talmud now. Tanu Rabbanan Asara Devarim Nivra'u Be'erev Shabbat. 10 phenomena were created on Shabbat Eve during twilight. So this magical time right before Shabbat comes in, and they were Miriam's well and manna and the rainbow, writing and the writing of the writing instrument and the tablets, the grave of Moses, the cave in which Moses and Elijah stood, the opening of the mouth of Balaam's donkey, and the opening of the mouth of the earth to swallow the wicked at the time of Korach. V'yesh omrim af makalo shel Aharon shkedia u'frachea v'yesh omrim af mazikin. Some say that even Aaron's staff was created with its almonds and its blossoms. And they end with this enigmatic thing about demons showing up as well at this time. But the idea that Aaron's staff with the almonds blossoming out of it would be included with all of these other important symbolic tools, and that they show up, as Shabbat is arriving, at the twilight, at that little magical time when the week comes to an end and the Shabbat is about to begin. Okay, bear with me. I want to continue down here. Sorry, I know this scrolling around can be disorienting. I was just looking for one other thing. Here. I have not yet learned the art of fitting in a visual, but it's pretty fun to see. This is an etching. I think this may be Gustave Doré, but I'm not sure. You can see here's Aaron, and here's the collection of staffs, and one of them is bringing up blossoms, which will later turn into almond fruit. Okay. Then this compiler goes into a whole bunch of things about the menorah, which I was not going to spend time on, since we already mentioned it. But there was one last thing in here that I wanted to show you. Here. So this is from a botanist. The almond is the earliest deciduous fruit and nut tree to bloom in spring due to its relatively low winter chilling requirement and quick response to warm growing temperatures. In nature, the almond growth cycle is well adapted to a Mediterranean or desert climate where plants are dormant during winter and the time of low temperatures, etc., etc. The Hebrew name for almond is shaked, which has its roots in ancient Semitic term, as seen in the Akkadian, and I'm not going to try to pronounce these words that I don't know how to pronounce. Shaked may also be translated as watchful, symbolizing God's watchfulness over God's people. Okay, and we already read the Jeremiah also. Only the staff of Aaron of the house of Levi, which was Almond, flowered. This was interpreted as a sign of divine favor to Aaron, of God's watchfulness over him and his descendants. According to tradition, the staff of Aaron bore sweet kernels on one side and bitter kernels on the other, symbolizing sustenance if the Israelites followed God, but bitterness if they were to forsake of God. So that's a midrash, if you will, or an expansion on what the Torah text says. The Torah text doesn't say specifically anything about the blossom, the flower, the fruit on Aaron's staff being both bitter and sweet. But if we look back at all the different ways we've been considering what the symbol of the almond means, this makes a lot of sense. If we were to allow ourselves, since we're in the wilderness here and all kinds of things can happen, if we were to allow ourselves to imagine that even on this staff of Aaron's that's blossoming, there are both the bitter and the sweet almonds. One meant as like a carrot. If you follow me, you will have the sweetness of this blessed life, this relationship with God. And if you come back at me again, if you think you want to be like Korach, here's the bitter almond for you to be punished with. And as Bob Barkin has now taught us, might even kill you. Amy, go ahead.
We talk about the idea that God is watching the Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a corollary to that, which is you better watch yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You look out after yourself
Mm-hmm.
and keep in mind your behaviors and what you're doing.
Yes, beautiful. A much more humanistic approach. Thank you. I mean, I think a humanist would say exactly what you just said. It's not really about God. It's about telling us to watch ourselves and be vigilant and pay attention. You know, open our almond eyes and pay attention. Okay, one last thing to share with you. Wait, I've got to make sure I've got the right thing teed up here. Hold on. Come back over here. Okay. Okay, this is just back to the things that I pulled together. And this is actually from the Chabad website. They often will share teachings of the Hasidic masters. Excuse me. And this is from one of the greats, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, noting that Aaron was the first Kohen that gets established in this reading that we've done today. He possessed the power to draw down a degree of compassionate love known as Rav Chesed, abundance of cosmic compassionate love. That's Aaron's role in the community. He is known to have transformed enmity between people into love, and also to confer the aura of love over a group or even the nation. His heirs, the Kohanim, inherited this trait, according to this master Shneir Zalman of Liadi, and continue this process to the present day. So I would say that's aspirational, not factual, but that's okay. It's aspirational to say those who have this genetic marker have the capacity for this great love, and then it's up to them to develop that capacity. Not only do they have this capacity to draw in cosmic love and shower it on others, but also the spiritual flow is characterized by velocity and speed. And here he's going to, I think he's making the connection between the almond blossom, which blossoms first. It's the one that's in a hurry to get going. Like a mighty river whose fast-flowing waters carry away anything in their path, hurt, envy, hate, or misunderstanding. The Rav Chesed power of Aharon, and I would say by extension the whole line of the Kehuna, not only reconciled warring parties, but did so with expeditiously. A further example of this took place during the archetypal dispute for leadership, Korach's challenge of Moses and Aaron. The spiritual test came in the strange form of a competition. Which disputant could make an almond branch blossom? Aaron did so with amazing speed. And here, this, I think it's the editor speaking here, not Shneir Zalman of Liadi, saying that Shaked has this connection with being expeditious, being speedy, being wrapping it up quickly, because it's the fastest growing of all the fruits. It jumps into the season first. It was a particularly good receptor of Aaron's spiritual powers. Although most of us do not possess Aaron's amazing powers of Rav Chesed, we do have an innate power of loving kindness known as Chesed Olam. He says, in other words, and this is Shneir Zalman speaking, every one of us has the power to reconcile people with differences, to resolve disputants in conflict, to foster love where its lack is apparent. This capacity derives from our inner soul, but it needs to be aroused. It has to be cultivated. When it flows strongly and with velocity, it can carry away with it any ill feelings, enmities, jealousies, and vengeance. And I'll leave out the part about the kehuna and just leave that for all of us. We all possess the power to draw it down to the earthly plane. The Mishnah Peah says there are a special number of mitzvot that we cannot do too much of. There's no counting. Kavod av va'em, kibud av va'em, honoring our parents, honoring the generations. Gemilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness. Hashkamat beit hamidrash shacharit ve'arvit, supporting the house of study, participating morning and night. Hachnasat kala, making sacred partnerships, encouraging loving relationships. Bikur cholim, visiting the sick. The list goes on, and it ends with Hava'at shalom ben adam lachavero, the bringing of peace, the bringing of reconciliation between one person and another. And I would love to end today's study with this image of Aaron having this capacity, passing it on to his descendants, and since in the Reconstructionist movement, we have struggled with the kehuna, with the role of this caste system, saying we all have to somehow participate in this. We all have to be members of this kingdom of priests, as we were told we are, which means we all have this capacity to bring love into the world, and we all have to cultivate that capacity. So enjoy some almond snacks, and next time you do, think of what they might mean for your ability to help shut down the Korachs of the world and strengthen the Aarons in our midst. That's it for me for today. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.